So I'm really looking forward to bringing you this. And I have a couple preliminary statements I'd like to make. The first is that I think that if you have been attending or are attending a seeker sensitive church, you probably want to reconsider that. Now, you may not have many options. If you don't have many options, you want to be among believers as much as you possibly can. So, that may be your best bet. Or maybe you have a task there you're trying to accomplish for God, something along those lines. Um, that's different. But I'm going to go through a few things today that should get you to at least think about whether that's the church for you, if you have other options. Not everybody does. So just do, what you can. And again, God may have provided a church for you, and it might be a seeker-sensitive church. But when I read what I'm going to read and talk about some things I'm going to talk about, you may want to really pray about it, at least. I attended a seeker-sensitive church for a long time, and my wife and I did. And it was great at first. And then I started to see some of the problems. And one of the problems was they didn't really want us, they did not encourage us to go out and share the gospel. The game plan was to bring unbelievers into the church, and they would hear the gospel there from a more charismatic source, I would say. Not charismatic in the religious sense, but in the personality sense. This was very effective for church growth, but it was a business model. It wasn't biblical. It was, it just ran dry for us very quickly. There were some other things that happened, but ultimately, God led us out from there. It becomes very repetitive, even though they try to put a different face on it all the time. Essentially, it was pretty repetitive, which is, the Bible teaches against that. But now, this is not just about seeker-sensitive churches. This is about Romans. But what I want to tell you is that I'm very careful because of this Hebrews passage about the way I preach the gospel at church. So let's bring in the celebrity that's taking this channel by storm. I mean, let's bring him on in here, the zany professor, straight back from Egypt, red-eye flight, and here and ready to go. A little bit jet lag, but ready to go. This is Hebrews 5, starting in verse 11. About this we have much to say, and it is hard to explain, since you have become dull of hearing. For though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you again the basic principles of the oracles of God. You need milk, not solid food, for everyone who lives on milk is unskilled in the word of righteousness, since he is a child. So you see this in Corinthians, you're seeing this in Hebrews, this idea that there's this hierarchy, right? And you start at the bottom, and to follow Christ is to make your way up the hierarchy. At least to be trying to do that. Okay, so that is how an individual follows Christ, is that there's going to be more demands on you as you move along. And you'll be equipped to meet those demands. Okay, you're not alone on it. It'll be your joy and pleasure to do it. It may even come with some suffering. Now I'm going to reread 13 because this matters. For everyone who lives on milk is unskilled in the word of righteousness, since he is a child. Now that's pretty important, right? It's basically telling you, how long should a child live on milk? And this is probably one of the passages I read that got me rethinking about continuing to attend that church. In 14 it says, but solid food is for the mature, for those who have their powers of discernment trained by constant practice to distinguish good from evil. Very important. Now let's go to chapter 6. This is, if I've said this many times, so I'm going to say it here for the first time on this channel. If I had this verse memorized and put into my own words, there'd be a fair number of Christians that would, and I made it sound like it was my idea. There'd be a fair number of Christians that would disagree with me on this, even though it comes straight out of Hebrews. They would just be like, no, that can't. They may even think I'm a heretic. 6:1, it says this: Therefore, let us leave the elementary doctrine of Christ and go on to maturity, not laying again a foundation of repentance from dead works and of faith toward God, and of instructions about washings, the laying on of hands, the resurrection of the dead, and eternal judgment. So these things are very important, right? They're glorious, they're wonderful. And the author of Hebrews here is not saying they're anything less than that, but he's saying that they're milk. Does it make them lack value? No, they're very valuable. It's just that it's a beginning. It's not the end. So this next verse, though, is the one that gives me, this is verse 3. It says, and this we will do if God permits. So when you get to that point where you are being trained in discernment, you're learning the scriptures, you're trying to live for God, you will at some point learn discernment. And in your time of learning that, you will realize that you are also to teach others in more advanced ways of righteousness, because there are more advanced ways of righteousness awaiting us. So that brings me here to Romans. And so this morning I basically preached the gospel. That's what I did. I felt like I had permission to do it. I told my church that the way we would discuss issues is when they came up in the Bible. So if tithing comes up, we're going to talk about tithing when I get there. When the gospel comes up. So I've preached, I think in the 10 years I've been here, I've preached a sermon that was centered around the gospel probably less than 5 times. I easily could have done it, but almost week in and week out, we go over missionary issues because it comes up so frequently. Okay, so let's go to our passages here. And we're going to start in a weird place. We're going to start in 3:31. It says, do we then overthrow the law by this faith? By no means. On the contrary, we uphold the law. So this is essential to the gospel. And that is that the wrath that's revealed from heaven is the final, the state of that is ultimately found on the cross, though, for those who believe. So the law is upheld because the punishment is poured out on his son. The scriptures say it pleased him to bruise his son. Okay, so among many other scriptures we could easily go to. So we know then that the law is far from devoid, right? It's not voided. It's actually strengthened because it's actually fully understood. Now that should shock no one, that the law was not fully understood prior to Christ, okay? But there were mysterious things that had not been fulfilled, that when Christ came, they were fulfilled, to the point that when people rejected Christ, other people were saying, well, if this isn't the Messiah, then who would be? And that gets to this in chapter 4 of Romans. It says, what then shall we say was gained by Abraham, our forefather according to the flesh? For if Abraham was justified by works, he has something to boast about, but not before God. For what does the scripture say? It says this, Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. Now to the one who works, his wages are not counted as a gift, but as his due. And to the one who does not work, but trusts him who justifies the ungodly, his faith is counted as righteousness, just as David also speaks of the blessings of the one to whom God counts righteousness apart from works. And he quotes David, blessed are those whose lawless deeds are forgiven and whose sins are covered. Blessed is the man against whom the Lord will not count his sin. So I showed them sort of this line, right? You have Abraham, then you have David, and then you have Jesus. So that when you go down this line, you see this godly pattern has made its way. So this pattern of faith comes to Abraham first. So I was trying to explain to the church, and what's happening here is that the best way to see this is foundational. That you first have, now there's another way to see it, and we'll get to that, but there's a foundation established by God. Salvation by grace through faith, right? Abraham believed, and it was the belief that caused that God accredited that belief to him as righteousness. That isn't fulfilled in the law. That is a foundational principle not fulfilled in the law. It couldn't have been. So it goes to David, right? And you go to David, and it's still there. It hasn't gone anywhere. And then you get to Jesus, and I want to read one of my absolute favorite passages of the Bible. This is John 20:24. Now Thomas, one of the 12, called the twin, was with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see his hands, the mark of the nails, and place my finger into the marks of the nails, and place my hand into his side, I will never believe." 8 days later, his disciples were inside again, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands, and put out your hand and place it in my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe." Thomas answered him, "My Lord and my God." Sounds a lot like Abraham, doesn't it? "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, this is awesome, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." So it's available to everyone. But it starts with it, but again, it hadn't gone anywhere. It was a foundational principle all the way up from Genesis to this point, okay? So it had gone nowhere. Now, there's a second point, though, I've alluded to. So there's the sense in which it's foundational, right? And then also I want to comment very quickly that Abraham, if he obeyed the law, would have expected to receive a wage for being obedient to that law. But Abraham's righteousness was a foreign, we call it a foreign righteousness from God that came to him for belief. And that's a gift. That's not a wage. All right. And that's what Paul's trying to establish. Now, there's another principle here that I haven't really talked about much yet, but is actually a guiding principle for me to understand this. In fact, I think it's a universal idea that the Bible picks up on, but I'll have to elaborate on that at another time when we have more time. But this is verse 9. It says, "Is this blessing then only for the circumcised or also for the uncircumcised? We say that faith was counted to Abraham as righteousness. How then was it counted to him? Was it before or after he had been circumcised? It was not after, but before he was circumcised. He received the sign of circumcision as a seal of the righteousness that he had by faith while he was still uncircumcised. The purpose was to make him the father of all who believe without being circumcised, so that righteousness would be counted to them as well, and to make him the father of the circumcised, who are not merely circumcised, but also walk in the footsteps of the faith that our father Abraham had before he was circumcised." Now, this is important, because what he's saying here is this. Abraham is the father of all faith. Okay, he's the father. He would be the father both of the Jews and the Gentiles. Another thing that's happening here, I think, that can be missed, but you see it in the Old Testament, okay, is that a claim of superiority by the Jews toward the Gentiles, you see this here in chapter 4 of Romans, is just destroyed now. It's destroyed. Because we're gonna flesh this out a little bit, but Genesis makes it clear that those who come before are greater than those who come later. Now, is it saying they're better people? No. Is it saying, like, for example, man is made before female. Does this make man better than female? No. But there's a priority here. Okay, God is telling us something. by the priority in which he does things. So by making Abraham the father of the the faith came while he was a Gentile. And this comes before circumcision. So this means that it is superior to circumcision. Now, that may be hard for some to believe. But by the way, if it's superior to circumcision, then that makes it superior to the law. Okay, so this is John 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Now, he was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Now you ask a seminary student, ask a very advanced seminary student, in fact, you could, and say, what's John 1 about? And they may be tempted to say, well, the Trinity. Now, they're not wrong, right? I mean, that's what you can glean from this. But that's not the point here. The point here is that in the beginning, Jesus was there. And all things were created through him. What does that mean? That means everything that was created came after him, and therefore makes him superior to all things that come after him. Just like Abraham being a Gentile and Abraham's faith being accredited to him as righteousness, that is superior in its order, in that it's closer to God, and therefore precedes the law. This is called the Hebrew order of primacy. Now, this gets conflated with some issues with the Hebrew language. I don't have time to get into all that, but you can still look this up. But it's critically important. Now, just in case you struggle with this, here's where it gets really interesting. This is down in 14. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory, glory as the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. Now listen to this in 15. John bore witness about him and cried out, this was he of whom I said, he who comes after me ranks before me because he was before me. I'm sorry, ranks before me because he was before me. So this gives some understanding. What's happening in John 1:1 fleshes out what John the Baptist was trying to say. This person ranks higher than me. Why? Because he was before him. Okay, now, but in context, look at 16. And from his fullness, we have all received grace upon grace, right? Now, what's that? Well, that comes with belief. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. Why is that there? Why is that there? It's there to give you perspective. It's there to show you that Jesus ranks higher and what he brings is more important. Now you might go, okay, but think about what we're talking about. We're talking about Romans 4. And what's it saying? That Abraham's faith was before, right? So for Jesus to come before, and within the context of what John the Baptist is saying, he comes before, and therefore what he brings is superior to what comes later. Absolutely fascinating. It's easy to run too far with this. In fact, I know I've probably done that many times, but I have I've done a lot of thinking about what this means. Is this a universal concept? And if you really stop and think about it, this is still a way in which we think about things in many respects. But there's not enough time to talk about that. I'll have to get on it another time. All right. Have a wonderful week.